And here we go. Oh, good job. Here we go so we just, for the recording purposes, we just approved the minutes from May 21st. And now we're going to move on to the town plan draft chapters. And I'm just going to start doing this every single time, but thank you to staff for all of the awesome work. I know this is a huge project. So appreciate it. And Emily, what's going to be our process here? Are you guys going to share the screen again like last time?
Yeah, I can share the screen like last time. I do know that Melinda's not here, and Jill's not here for education and childcare. But Steve is here.
I can be the blue team to the extent that I can be the blue team.
If we wanted to start with blue team, we might skip over economic development and do that one towards the end because that's Matt's chapter.
All right, and he's at
he's at the select board for hopefully just the first half hour.
Great. All right, so we'll save that for last. All right, and Steve, you were not here last time, but people were very, very appreciative of your people of Williston writing. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm not sure what the protocol is here, but basically what we did was we began by gathering as much data as we could, as I'm sure everyone did, and tried to kind of put it together into a flow that said, here are the challenges we face, here are the opportunities that lie before us, here are the reasons why we believe that the direction we've chosen is the right direction or will be the right direction. Here are some of the dark spots, the people that live in poverty in Williston that we don't want to talk about, but that's a reality. The kind of issues that are real and deserve attention and so on. We then kind of put all that together, tying it together with as many facts, figures, tables, and so on as we could, where they weren't overwhelming, but they supported the story. They basically said, this is what we believe to be true. Here's the data that supports what we believe to be true. And then the last part of it, we wrote a sort of here's what we think education and things associated with this look like in, say, 10 years, 15 years from now. We didn't really put a number on it, but we basically painted a picture that said, here's what's going on. And we had, reduced numbers of school buses. We had more people walking and riding bikes. We had greater use of bike paths. We had a variety of educational opportunities that went beyond just traditional curriculum, but also gave kids the ability to enroll in life skill classes and, things that we thought would help round out their educational journey, if you will. We then kind of wrapped it up. Can you go kind of toward the end if you could just for a second? I don't want to miss. We wrapped it up. I say Melinda actually did this, so I'm really not qualified to speak to it in any great amount of detail, but we said, this is where we think we're going. These are the action items we believe we should take based on the key factors that we think are important. Here are the strategies that we think will help us, and kind of ended it there. So I realize that's kind of a light overview, but I don't have Melinda's details to speak to this myself, so I'm entertain any questions you might have. Oh, I should also say, I tried repeatedly to get time with Greg, Greg Marina, the principal of the school, and I could not make it happen. And talking to Melinda, that apparently is not uncommon. So I wanted to get some pithy quotes from him. I wanted to get some insights from him. I wanted to get more information, basically from the horse's mouth, if you will. But we'll try to get that and incorporate it in a later version.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, in another 2 weeks, you'll be able to do that, I think.
Yeah,
this is a really tough time right now.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
On top of that, he had kids graduating college to get to and stuff. So
right. Yeah. So we'll get it in there.
How did y'all do this last week when you were going through chapters? Like, what was the feedback process like? And like, is there a,
Yeah, so I think we would kind of go a little bit into what the objective strategies and action items are. And then provide any feedback if we think any are missing. So let me make sure this is, yeah, so it goes into the goal, overarching goal, the 3 words, and then objective. The town and school district will establish ongoing coordination and communication to facilitate sound decision-making and future school strategic planning.
Yeah, one of the things that Melinda brought up, which I wasn't aware of, but I think it's important, is that there are communication gaps between the town, the schools, and the various commissions and organizations. And it's not deliberate, it just happens because it's a lot of moving parts. And what we discovered, or what she discovered, is that, for example, the town will sometimes run educational programs internally for staff, not specifically for staff, but no one else knows about it. And it's not because they're keeping it a secret, but because nobody thought maybe somebody else might be interested in attending. And so one of the goals we have is to tighten that up as much as possible and raise awareness among all the various players to make sure you think it through. And if this might be something that needs to be shared with this organization, make sure you do that. Let it be their decision not to attend if they don't want to. But if it's feasible that others should attend, then we would do that. And I think that's where some of these strategies come into play, seek information related to strategic planning and ongoing operations and so on.
I will say this is the space where I guess for me personally, it's not that it's hard to see the connection. There's lots of obvious connections between planning and education, and also like there's not zoning, there's not as much sort of very concrete connections for me in terms of the like having those really hard strategies with like more concrete dates. So I felt like I didn't have as much to add in this one, even though I have 2 school-age kids.
Can I say what we are suggesting is more of regular touch point between the school administration and the town side?
I don't know what form it will take.
Yeah. Some kind of touch point, right? It could be a monthly or quarterly or whatever to say, oh, we are doing this and we are doing this.
Maybe. I
Or
don't know
going
that it
this
even has to be
direction.
that formal. I think it could be something as simple as, when we do, for example, I'm making this up, but this part of the town administration decides they're going to do a DEI presentation by an expert that happens to be in town. Great. But maybe they should let other people know that, because they might want to attend. That's something they might be interested in, and it would save somebody else having to schedule a similar session if they could do it all at once. And apparently there have been opportunities like that have been missed just because people weren't aware. So it's more a matter of just, hey, let's raise everybody's awareness about this stuff. And, maybe there's a common place that it could be put, it could be recorded, it could be made available so that people can, maybe a common calendar, something like that.
Go ahead, Chapin.
There's lots of goodwill between the town and the school, but there is a communication gap, I agree. And I don't think this is necessarily something to be changed in this chapter, but 2 areas that I work across that boundary. One is on conservation efforts. I work a lot with students on conservation and planting trees and caring for the environment. And the other is about our cultural heritage. I've recently given Abenaki dictionaries to both school libraries and have been working with the Allenbrook School kids a little bit on understanding the Abenaki heritage, partly because Tree Island, or Abazim Manahani by the Allenbrook School is the home of artifacts that were dug when they were thought it was going to be the Cirque Highway. And so I feel like cultural exchanges and conservation efforts around town are 2 places that I would like to see just sort of very direct collaboration. And this sort of forces an issue, which is right now the waiver form for anybody volunteering to do work on town property does not allow minors to volunteer, period. And that needs to be fixed. And it's a big hurdle to fix it.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, Chapin, and I will work that in. I'll share that with the rest of the team when we get back together and we'll discuss that. That's a good thing to add.
So that first objective is about coordination and communication more for strategic planning and budgetary. The second objective, the town and school will coordinate to ensure that schools have adequate funding for capital expansions needed to accommodate a growing population. The town will continue to charge impact fees as called for in the periodic impact fee assessments. The school district should update its impact fee assessment. The town will call for new school impact fees. And I believe Williston is the only municipality that still pays an impact fee for CVSD.
That's interesting.
What does that mean? Why don't other towns pay it? Why do we pay it? What is it for?
Yeah,
For someone
so
who doesn't know.
yes, so the current impact fee that it's charged is for the high school. The CVU high school expansion that I think happened back in 2008. And some communities, when figuring out how they were gonna handle it. Williston, some portion of it was paid through a bond to the taxpayers, because you can only charge an impact fee a fair share for the new growth. So some of the expansion is related to, the existing capacity. I'm not quite sure of all the mechanics of it, why some communities do and don't, whether their fees sunsetted early. It just kind of looks like Williston pays an impact fee to CVSD, and it kind of goes into the general fund. And doesn't really buy down any rates, so there's some mechanics and nuances to school impact fees. Melinda probably could speak to it better than I could.
And definitely better than I can.
I do have a question. I didn't see, and I don't know that we need this, but when we were talking about cannabis dispensaries, when we think about tobacco and alcohol outlets, when we think about like what or things that we do want, like Chapin, you had mentioned at one point expanding conservation or park access near Allenbrook. Like when we think about what we do and don't want around schools, Steve, was there any specific, even just statement around that, even if we don't need to do any objectives and actions right this minute? And sorry if I missed it, and maybe we don't need it. So lots of caveats, but do we want to say anything about healthy environments, and education and conducive environments around school spaces? And it gets trickier with childcare real fast because there are so many more sites. So I want to be careful with that. But and we've sort of talked about, I think last week we were talking about how the industrial zone allowed childcare because people wanted to have childcare near where they're working, and then all of a sudden there's now conflict between the childcare and the industry that is zoned for that space. Anyway, so again, caveats with childcare, I think definitely, but it's probably a little bit clearer with schools.
Yeah, Sheila, and that might play into broadening this next objective about site design standards and state exemptions. So if there's a bylaw amendment about things like cannabis or tobacco or other use where you want to consider its relationship and distance to schools, to, coordinate with the schools on that.
I guess go ahead.
No, I just noted, I'll take this to the group.
Kind of on like a same track, but different arm of it is like when thinking about what's around the school, something that I'm noting in the next objective down where it's talking about the school's role as a community hub. To foster social cohesion, trust, and mutual support networks. I guess I'm curious, given like all of the support for something like like all of the verbalized like desire for something like a community center, like what does this, I guess I'm wondering, how can the school verbalize more of what they need from the town, whether that's like, hey, we'd love more kids to ride their bike to school and we're really missing just like this segment, or like if there was a pedestrian cross, like if there was like a flasher beacon right here, what would it look like for the school to communicate to the town how zoning could help them, but also the town communicate to the school about like, hey, what types of programs could we run here or like run together? Like, I'm curious if there's like another strategy under making it like a social hub essentially, because it's got a park, which it's got the best park that Williston has. Like, what would it look like to get more people there regularly and make it more part of a community hub? Like, obviously it's a school, it has other functions, but that's kind of, I'm wondering if there's another strategy that can go under that section, just around like what is around the school.
Yeah, and Hannah, I wonder if that also ties into the communications piece we were talking about, making sure that the schools not only communicate to us, but feel motivated to communicate, whoever us is, about those kinds of things. Because I'm not sure it's ignorance on my part. I don't know if that's there or not. That's a really good point. That's a really good point. And that whole division of labor thing around, if we do end up with a community center, what happens there versus what happens in schools, and what kind of shared programs exist and that kind of thing, that would be a really good one to add.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Two things that I don't know exactly how they relate, but one is that when the proposal to put a cell antenna in the old brick church was being considered, a number of people were concerned about the effect on school children because it was closer to a school than is recommended by some organizations, but there's very fuzzy data on that. So that sort of fits in the environment, and I don't know that we want to do anything with it. The second is that the school actually owns the land that the town does events on behind the library. That's school land maintained by the town. Public Works mows it and stuff. There's been some disagreement about who should be pruning. But there's a memorandum of understanding for that. And then there's the reverse case down at Tree Island beside Allenbrook School, where the town owns that land, but the school uses it. And in fact, the school has built or volunteers for the school built a lean-to on it. And so we had to have a memorandum of understanding about liability and so forth for that. And so town school partnerships are important, and there's real cases going on, I guess is what I wanted to say. And then the final thing I wanted to share is not related to this chapter, but to the impact fee. I'm really surprised other towns don't have a school impact fee. But I think their growth rate is flatter than Williston's, and that may be why. When the districts consolidated, Williston had already been approved and budgeted for an $18 million enhancement of Williston Central School, and so that was being paid by all the taxpayers in the district. So Williston, I didn't want anybody to think Williston is losing out, because that bond is being paid collectively, by all the towns. Thanks.
Thanks for explaining that, Chapin. Other comments on this chapter? Oh, Megan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Let's see. My comments are about the objective. It's right at the end of this chapter. Just a little bit up from that. Yeah. So I totally support this and get where you're coming from with these strategies. And I guess I have a couple questions though. Mainly the middle strategy. I guess what I would recommend is that so these are very specific action recommendations, and they're essentially already outdated. So the internship course from UVM is actually called Sustainable Planning now instead of Sustainable Transportation, and courses change constantly. So I would just recommend, given the constant turnover at UVM, that it be a broader statement, just to say, coordinate with, local institutions of higher learning, or however you want to say it, to offer partnerships, rather than very specific examples,
Sure.
because they just cease to exist, and we don't necessarily keep track of that for the town plan. So that was one comment. The other thing I would love to see in here is taking kind of a step. By the way, this is a phenomenal chapter. Everything looks really great. I would love to see, though, kind of a step back to thinking more broadly about education. There's a lot in here about schools, and obviously childcare is in the title as well. I wonder if we could kind of think like about education as a lifelong learning endeavor, rather than just focus. I mean, it's fine to focus on schools, but I think also maybe let's add something additionally about, I mean, like we're part of I realize this isn't necessarily in Williston, but I don't know what their status is after COVID, but the classes that you can take through Access,
Yep.
French classes or basket weaving or whatever it is. And, so maybe just thinking more broadly about, as maybe a final piece, perhaps even an objective, about kind of facilitating or, I don't know, coordinating around, communicating around opportunities for broader forms of education, I guess I would just say that.
Sure. And Megan, I will tell you that you may not have read it, but there's a section in here. It's I can't remember what I called it. It's like the future of education, or what it looks like in the future, something silly like that. And there's a section in there that speaks to lifelong learning and the fact that education is not just about children. It's also about adults. It's about life skills. It's about expansion. It's about broadening. It's about all those kinds of things. So there's nothing in there that's specific, but specific skills. But to your point, we kind of included it. We just didn't build a strategy around it. So I'm going to write that down, and I'll put that in there.
Okay, great.
And I think that plays into as well, like a lot of the rec programming and library program is about learning a new skill or activity. Or exploring like a topic.
Yes, and CVU has evening programs, continuing learning.
Thank you both.
If we're gonna get specific, I had one other thing that I noticed in the actions, and one of them was develop the Town of Williston app. And as someone who is a software engineer who has done an app and has published one, marketed one, whatever, it's I guess I have questions on kind of the efficacy, of it. So before we jump in and do that, I'd wonder what is our website what if we could improve our website so that
It's
people.
the best thing we had in 1982.
Yeah. Exactly. So
what did you say about being a software engineer? Could we hire her just on the side?
No.
She'll work for free.
But I think that apps have a really limit, there's this big trend of everyone wants an app and everyone was really into apps. And I think from my anecdotal experience, it's kind of swung, kind of the bar for you to be like, yeah, I guess I'll download this app if I have to, has kind of increased just because we have so many of them. And so I guess I'm wondering, like, Front Porch Forum is really active, and what if we take that as a signal of like, people are like pretty engaged over email as a mechanism? Like, obviously everyone has a gazillion notifications, but like, what if we explore some lower barrier entry that is more broadly accessible? Like, I understand there are people who don't have computers, but it's like you've got, it's like there are people who are like, yes, I can go on the internet, but less so, maybe I don't have a phone that has apps or whichever. So I'm wondering if there's another mechanism that gets us the communication part that is more widely beneficial. But, we could also look at, I think you mentioned South Burlington has an app, like other towns that have done it, what's been effective, what hasn't, like, would they do it again, things like that.
Yeah.
So that was just a
Yeah.
point I wanted to raise about that.
Or the app would be after like fixing the website and shifting several other things to
Mhm.
online.
More interactive website.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
and to
might
your-
be coming eventually.
yeah, and to your point, some of the best, and I'm gonna use air quotes here, some of the best apps I've
Mhm.
seen were simply mobile websites.
Exactly.
Right, so, and I think that's kind of where we were going with that,
Mhm.
not, is there a specific, go to the Apple Store and download the app? But more importantly, if we have something like that, a site that people want to go to because it's so rich,
Yeah.
then we're in everybody's pocket.
Exactly.
So we can get a lot of stuff pushed out and a lot of stuff brought in, and so that's
Yeah.
really good, thank you for that.
Yeah, like,
Yeah, and that is what South Burlington uses is from a national company that does a lot of different government function stuff, but one that they do really well is communication to citizens. And what it lets you do as a user is decide how frequently you want to hear from them. So I have it set for the weekly digest. I get one email a week from South Burlington. And it's really just a picture of what's on that page of their website of here's what's coming this week, here's what's happening, and I think you can get it daily, you can get it as it's updated if you want, or you can get it as an email digest, and there's some other nice things, they just make it a lot easier for a lot of different departments to put their stuff into it on the back end, and it works pretty well, but I think really broadly, whether it lives in education or social infrastructure or somewhere, I think there is an objective or maybe even a goal, a level above an objective about the town having a communications strategy system and just a way of expressing to its citizens what's happening. And also kind of you think about everything you're writing in this plan about here's where, we want the select board to ultimately agree, we think we're all going. And to be able to communicate that to everyone in town of, here's where we're going, there are things that people see in town, I remember when some of the crossing signals were put in the village. And somebody complained, those neon green signs are really ugly and they're out of place with the historic village. And it's like, well, yeah, you're right. There's a balance there. But the town is going in a direction of being more pedestrian friendly and trying to cross people safely
imagine that they're
over a state
visible.
highway. And so, the planners, Emily and I and Andrew, who are sitting here in this office, everything we see, we're weighing and going, yeah, that's true, but it's really important people don't get run over in the village, and it's important for the village to not just be something to look at, but that people can use, and I think the crossing things win in this case. You can, if you're steady about it, you can communicate that kind of stuff to the people in your community, and it is something as a South Burlington citizen, I think they do well, is like, we heard from everybody and now we're doing this, and I think you as planning commission members have certainly experienced the need when you're talking to somebody who's not happy with the decision the town has made to say, yeah, we did think about that, but we had something else that outweighed it this time. A steady, consistent communications strategy can really help get that across. And I think sometimes we're a little bit as town, we're playing catch up on some
Well,
of
I think
that.
you're making a
It's
really
tough.
important point, and that is that in a situation like this where it's gray, right? I mean, there is no, sometimes there is, but often it is a balancing act. We've got to decide which one is better for the town, and that might be a marginal difference, but in a situation like that, I think it's more important that people understand why we made the decision we did, even if they don't agree with it.
Mhm.
Because then at least they've got some ammunition they could use to change their thinking or to suggest a different approach or whatever it may be. And I think that's what's all been missing.
I actually would like to, so Hannah, now that you've started this rabbit hole, I'm gonna go all the way down it. I do think, I mean, I have been frustrated by our lovely, beautiful website for as long as I've been part of this commission. And I do think it impedes, I mean, Steve, what you were just talking about is awesome. Most people probably can't find the decision. Forget why we made it, how we got there, what the process, to find the planning commission and then the agendas and then the minutes and then this, it's a challenge. And like you guys, this is not a criticism of staff. You do everything you possibly can with the tool you have at your fingertips here. But I do think that it is a limitation, and it's much broader than this chapter, I think, potentially. So I think it probably goes somewhere else, and we could include this action as a sub bullet of it. But I would push for having something in the town plan about having a website that is user friendly and can promote the things that we are doing, or even that just exist. Where can you walk safely? Where is it, easy to access trails? Where are we looking to develop them next? Whatever, that's very trail focused, but just like there's so many pieces of what the town is up to that it is tough if you're a citizen and you don't know how to navigate the website or how to use the system, or that you can just show up and hassle who's ever sitting at the front desk. Like it's harder to figure it out and know where to go for that information, and the website's not inviting. So I do think it's sort of key and integral to a whole host of what we're talking about here is to, I mean, even Emily, you talked about wayfinding. I think if you have finding it many times, and like even that, like to have a website that would be easy to navigate, where you could even learn about what that is. I don't know. I think it has so many pieces to it, and I do agree with you that the website would be a better place to put energy than an app, and we could maybe use it as a push tool in a different way. So I don't know how that goes, Matt, but that I would push for having an objective to do, and that is not a small project, right? But to do a website overhaul that has accessibility and I mean, it's an equity thing, it's a disability thing, and doesn't look like it's older than I am. Also, just for fun.
So maybe eventually, like, things are in the work with our existing website provider to switch to a newer website. It'll look different from the outside. Fingers crossed that the back end will allow us to like at least batch upload documents, because a lot of your taxpayer dollars are spent us uploading things one at a time. But what I've been communicating strongly to people organizing that project is you can have the best website provider there is, and it all comes down to the policy of how departments upload that information, because you can have a great website and if every page is doing things slightly different, and if there's like a hierarchy of information where one department is posting a lot and another department's not posting anything, that's, I think, getting to Shayla, what you're talking about, of it all comes down to having a website, but then using the tool properly.
You mean you shouldn't like edit the document with a pencil and then scan it and upload that as the next iteration? Because
exactly
state.
Yeah, that type of thing. Yeah, and thinking about like uploading documents and information for how the user would experience them rather than siloed by department. Which means like our bylaw would live with ordinances and not on the planning and zoning page. The town plan would live in policies, that type of thing, where it's based more holistically and more structurally. It's like yeah, when your event is over, like you take that thing down, like upload things that are coming up, like a little, like more, websites are work, it's tending a garden. And if you just let the weeds grow all over, then
Can't
it could have
find
been the best garden to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, we have people, not as frequently as they used to, but show up with a permit all filled out, and it's a version of the permit application that we haven't used in a decade. Because they Googled Williston permit application, and somewhere in the bowels of that website, they found some, or they will find versions of the bylaw, of the zoning bylaw, that are outdated, or we've had a couple of those as well, just really simple version control stuff that there's a lot out there, and it's just really hard to keep track of. But there is, I think we can acknowledge in this plan, probably by the time this plan is adopted, I think the website project will be done, and we can look at it and say, this plan can call for what the next step is, beyond that. I think it will look nicer.
Yeah.
I don't know how much more usable it's gonna be.
But
just
I
yet.
think, I mean, Hannah's probably forgotten more about this stuff than I'll ever know, but the fact of the matter is that with a website, if it's not usable, this sounds stupid, but if it's not approachable and easy to use, people will not use it. And if they will not use it, then that's a black mark, and we can't afford that. It should be the portal into an easy to access portal. And I think it's worth spending the time and potentially the money to do it right. I mean, I really do. Because there are a lot, we all know the websites that we just hate going to, because God, I should have written down where I found it last time. So it's gonna take me until lunch to find it this time, and that's not helpful.
Yeah.
So they have to be,
I
my
think we
point
could
is that
probably
policies
still
and
have a
standards.
website related goal, because, and this we'll probably get into this when Matt and I are kind of co-working on the facilities and services, as things are. The website is one hub, but then like document file management, permit file management tend to be different providers. That then all speak to each other, whereas right now we're uploading PDFs to the website, when typically you hold that. It's like a different
Yeah.
provider that makes it more easy to find, or is a system that's better to find, minutes and approvals and that type of things.
Yeah.
So you probably know all.
I'm
of
happy
this.
to talk, and then like we can schedule a meeting outside of this if there's a provider that you're working with, like even just to like sit in, hear what your needs are, and if you're talking to like a technical person, like be an intermediary, like even if that's helpful in any capacity, like if there's a website provider you're working with or whatever. So,
Contact Erin.
Okay.
Let her know that you want to do that.
okay.
All right, I think in the interest of time, we should keep going to another chapter. To rush us, but
Don't go there.
Okay.
I already admitted to my
All right, we can go to the,
slacking on economic development.
we can go from
Go
the
there
bottom and
last.
then we'll finish there.
These are so much better.
And I'll zoom in. So social infrastructure and the arts, and I'm not sure why my caption moved around in this version. Megan, do you want to speak to the introduction, because this is the section that you wrote?
Sure. Yeah, I tried to take kind of a broad view of, what could we mean by social infrastructure? And then once I sort of was thinking through that, I tried to back up and think about the ways that, the town, meaning the governance structure of the town, could actually support or facilitate those kinds of, gatherings, the places that people find meaningful, all of those things. So, yeah, so at the beginning, I think if you scroll up just a tiny bit there, Emily, or maybe a little more to just the first couple words. Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that we were thinking about social infrastructure as really is the sort of intangible dimensions of a place that has a sense of community, a connection to the physical place. And then also, the idea of mutual support of all members. So that to me was a really important dimension of our equity role in this process. So I also wanted to acknowledge that, the town can't make people get together and have fun, right? But but the town can be open to those ideas and creative practices and new interest groups or whatever they might be, and really provide the guidance that would be needed to make sure that there are spaces for different kinds of activities, that there's that those come with good, strong design, and that they are durable and people know about them. Resting briefly on the previous discussion of websites. Yeah, so it was just kind of trying to incorporate a lot of, very much recognizing, okay, these are the things that a town can do to enhance social infrastructure. Having a water bottle filling station. I mean, literally, it could be as simple as that. Providing shade, accommodating the seasonality of our location. Just a bunch of different ideas that came to mind in the moment. I also appreciated our conversation last time about third spaces. And I wanted to provide a little bit more of a context for them. So the idea, and this is also building on our discussion last time about privately owned, publicly accessible places, to make the distinction that it's kind of a spectrum between public and private, right? There's like truly public, where it's shared space that literally anyone can go and just be, all the way to, our domestic spaces that are very private. And so there's a lot in between, and some of that is publicly owned and like a park, or some of it is privately owned, but anyone can go there, like a cafe, right? So trying to kind of flesh that out a little bit with a couple of examples from, that would make sense for Williston. And then Emily had done most of this work on the arts, so I don't know if you want to take this
Yeah.
on. I kind of added a little bit just today, but so I don't know if that's in the, I don't know if it's in this version, but yeah.
It probably is, because this is a live updating
Oh, okay, great.
link. So thinking about expanding and broadening and thinking about more than just public art or going to an art gallery. I read up on the Vermont Creative Action Plan, so we're thinking about a lot of sectors of our community and our economy, from visual artists, theaters, musicians, also writers, artisan crafters, bakers, brewers, architects, etc., media, even things like web design is a bit of an art, as much as it is a computer science. So thinking about these broad spectrum of the creative sector that maybe exists in the town, maybe it's a business that's located in the town, or something that the town is interacting with. And then more traditional thinking about art is public art. So where can we create interest in art in everyday life, from painted utility boxes, bike racks, and bench shapes, signs, and community investment in the arts. So participating in governance, cultural outreach, conscious inclusion. The Vermont Creative Action Plan has statistics that at the smallest are the county level. And I'm trying to figure out if they get any finer grain to find out like what different creative sectors are in Williston. can be a little bit of a black hole to try to find some of that. And then the Vermont Creative Action Plan, their goals and actions are a bit more nebulous, and we're trying to be a bit more concrete, so I've reached out to them and I'm waiting to hear back about, okay, what's a good community in Vermont that has a town plan has really concrete actions related to the arts. So the first goal, create and enhance indoor and outdoor public access to spaces. So this is thinking about places where people can gather, like pavilions, places where there's restrooms or grills and people can rent them. Thinking about like Oakledge Park in Burlington or Maple Street Park in Essex, like there's not a pavilion here where you can have like a kid's birthday party or some sort of gathering. Thinking about seating in pocket parks throughout town. And rather than have it be a top down, like, hey, the town's just gonna go put benches everywhere. Think from the bottom up. So, hey, community, where would you like to have a bench or a pocket park? Where are you walking? Where it'd be nice to take a rest? Collaborate with the school district on playgrounds and safety, so that blending between public and private space and, you know, student safety with parks that are used in the evening by the general public. Thinking about town policies for temporary and special events, especially for events and activities that would take place on town property. So is it easy and possible for a food truck to park on Zephyr Road one day? Or for people to have events and community gatherings? That temporary event permit was, or ordinance was established a couple years ago. And like we're thinking about with all tasks in our town plan, like, are we assessing it? Okay, how is this working? Should we adjust or keep going forward? Designing spaces with children and elderly in mind. When you're designing for people on the fringes, it works better for everyone. Enhance physical access, existing physical spaces through programming or partnerships. So thinking about farmers markets, music series, we have some of these in town. How can we, you know, create synergy between them, and how can the town have public space them? I'll pause there on the first goal.
I really like this particular chapter. The way y'all have structured it is really cool. And Megan, this kind of goes back to the beginning part more than anything else. What I really like is that what you collectively described is not so much specific actions, but catalytic events. Like you made the point, you can't force people to go be friendly because we're people, right? But we can put into place these things that will give people a reason to want to go to a public place and then by default gather. And that's what comes across in a lot of these. And I really, really like it. I think it's really cool.
I'm curious, has there been any study? I second everything that Sue just said, like yeah, I really like the kind of like the focus and kind of the direction towards these spaces that, yes, you can't make people gather, but if you make good spaces, they'll want to. And I'm curious, I know for like trails, there was a study that was done a while ago to essentially prioritize different trail segments. And I'm wondering if there's been like any type of similar studies around the different like parks and land and like any sort of cataloging, like what resources what studies have already been done that we could potentially run with, or do we have like an information gap? Because that first one, it's like, it seems like we might have info about that could like maybe be linked to, or, I was just curious.
I don't think we've done anything specific to Williston. We have talked before, actually, we were doing it, talking about primitive paths and conservation areas. Melinda and I were talking years ago about the idea of looking at where are the people and where are the country parks, and trying to just spatially think about the accessibility of those and who they're accessible to. And, you know, short story, the more expensive your house is, the more likely you are to live near a country park. Unfortunately, I think there might be a good action in here just like we're talking about identifying gaps in the sidewalk and path and trail system, to say there's a lot of people here and there's not a lot of spaces that would enhance social infrastructure here. I think, the statement is in here somewhere, right? There's no public park currently in Taft Corners. And that's just like a very obvious one, but taking it down to like a 10-minute walk shed or in each of the 4 quadrants of Taft Corners level. And saying, what can somebody get to? And also thinking about the fact that in Taft Corners, even in parts of Taft Corners where very few people live, a lot of people are there. So I think we have the only tire store in the state that we made build a pocket park at the same time at Town Fair Tire, and occasionally you will actually see people sitting on that bench on a nice day while they're waiting for their tires to be put on or taken off. And it's kind of nice. So there's probably a relatively simple mapping exercise the town could do to think about that. And then, those public lands or public park lands are an element that we put into the official map in the form-based code area, but we didn't do it throughout town in terms of actually taking somebody's private land in Williston and drawing some of it on the map and saying, we would really like a piece of this, should it come in for development. Now, policy-wise, that's exactly what the town did with the Glazer specific plan. But there were a number of times, as Emily and I were commiserating over the length, complexity, and level of effort required to go through specific plan, where you said there's gotta be easier ways to get public open space as a component of development than this. And one of them is to literally put them on the map as planned public facilities. And so if something like that was informed by a spatial analysis that said, here's the gaps, to me, that's probably at the action level. It's a project this chapter could call for to inventory and find gaps and then get the beginnings of a plan to close those gaps going.
That could connect to one of our chapters. Sorry, I'm eating, my mouth is full. I'll let Andrew take it from there.
Yes, I drafted something on equitability for conservation areas that covers the same topic.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about that. And I'll be talking about that as well in our chapter, so we can, talk more in a second.
Great.
Yeah, probably, I think one of the things you mentioned that like cataloging all the existing park amenities, it's like, okay, if we are gonna put in a pavilion or water fountain, where's the best place to do that first? And think about all of these places in a coordinated fashion, so we're gonna have limited time and money to do some of these things. Where's the best bang for the buck gonna be? The next one is support public art and community design and infrastructure. So the word art actually only appears once in the current town plan. That it should be incorporated into urban parks. It had very limited success. And the most recent success is because me and the design advisory committee really harped on it during the annex review, and Chris Snyder is nice for the most part. And the other sculptures are CVS and Panera. So getting public art through development review might not be the best method. There could be better ways of doing it where there's a percentage of landscaping or construction costs that helps determine like, okay, how much art are you buying? Form-based code allows for, but it doesn't require public art. So we're thinking more in that master planned official map style of, public art would be if it's a sculpture or mural, more of a public investment, or hey, a third party group wants to do something, does our town plan then support that action? Explore ways of integrating art and character into everyday life. Support does not necessarily mean financial funding, but could be in-kind support. So if there's a group that wants to paint the utility boxes, our town plan says that's okay. making it possible for other groups to, you know, have the support of the town. It may not be we're initiating something or paying for it, but supporting other groups and organizations. I'll pause there on public art.
Mhm. I think it's really cool. I walk by those panels every day on Zephyr. Never occurred to me that's public art. I mean, it's art, obviously, but I just assumed it was something part of the building plan. When they put, they're fun to look at. I stop and look at them quite often, but it might be interesting. That needs to be called out. I mean, people need to know that was a deliberate effort to do that.
And that was a later addition, because that concrete wall was so barren along the north side of the sidewalk. They're like,
It looks kind of like.
yeah, I kind of
shooting.
need something, yeah, so that was a nice addition, but not an outright requirement of our zoning that they do that.
Makes a difference.
Yeah, I think, you know, our experience under the old performance standards was that we got what we got, which is the other things on that list besides annex or the Finney ones, the CBS sculpture, you know, kind of blink and you'll miss it. Same thing with the eyelash at Panera, which is actually called, it looks like a big rusty eyelash on top of a rock. It's actually called Ode to Harrow. And it harks to the
You're probably the
agricultural
only one that knows
heritage.
this.
Well, it was originally proposed to just be the rock. And the rock was proposed to be a little more potato shaped than it ended up. And it just honestly in administering, so yeah, the CVS one is kind of. Again, blink and you'll miss it.
It's kind of lost in there, yeah.
I don't know if that one has a name or not. But it was very challenging in the development of Lot 30, the building including Panera, for the DRB, who are used to things like dimensional standards and, you know, really like engineering standards of sites. It was very difficult for them to pass judgment on whether this was a good piece of public art that met the requirement. There, yeah, you get there it is. You can sort of see the metal thing,
Gibraltar, yes.
and the rock behind. And so, you know, the nice thing about that one is at least it came in a little bit of a sort of a pocket park space, and that's will have been done much better in the annex project when that comes to fruition, but it's been a conversation and a negotiation and really not a lot of guidance in the current regulatory world. The other thing I'll say about art and form-based code, what really gets challenging is you don't have a lot of site left over to put art when you're, you know, bringing buildings up to the street. And what has happened in South Burlington is they require money to be spent on art as a percentage of the landscaping budget. And they require the landscaping budget to be a percentage of the project cost. And so what I've been told is happening is these buildings go in, they have, you know, a lot of lot coverage, very little open space. There's not a lot of places to put the landscaping. The city has allowed more of the landscaping budget to be shifted to art, but the art is almost always something that's bolted to the side of the building. And so each building will have an art element on it, which is kind of cool. But you start to think, well, boy, if you pooled all this effort together and there was an urban park somewhere, there could be something really, you know, significant here. So I think thinking about ways that the private sector can participate in the creation of those really high value public spaces, and whether there's a build on site or pay in lieu for offsite improvement to be, you know, to be developed by the town later sort of scenario, as is often done with parks and other things. We don't have to identify all of that, but I think it starts with learning more about what the community would like to see. And what they would see as valuable.
I feel a little bit, it's obviously different than water runoff spaces, but it sort of has a similar issue here where it's been asked kind of project by project in this silo's a weird word. Anyway, it's not thinking about it more broadly. And it's just sort of kind of using it as it almost feels like a penalty, like you have to pay this art penalty in order to build your building versus somehow actually being generative and fostering a space where that can happen. And I do think money is a big part of that, and funding to support it. And so I don't know how we do this, but I do like what you're saying, where it's more of like pool the resources than, put a small metal art sculpture somewhere where we won't necessarily see it. So I would be supportive of something kind of specific in that way. And then the other one was, is there anything, because I know we have really clear sign language in various places, and I just want to make sure that none of that is prohibitive to like to murals, because we don't have any murals in Williston that I know of, and I do think that's a cool and beautiful sort of way to use, especially because we do have a lot of long, solid walls available in this town. So I don't know how other places. I visited a friend in Philly recently, and like they have just these incredible, gorgeous murals all over Philly. Burlington does have a number of them. Anyway, I don't know how we encourage that, but I feel like we have the available space.
Yeah, we should integrate that into the number 2 bullet points portion, right? Because that's what it is. But do we have some kind of like the team that identifying with the town? So let's say like if I go to Saratoga Springs, they will have a horse, different type of horse across everywhere in the Saratoga Springs. So do we have something like that
We've
No.
never done that. I mean, it's like Barry has the car sculptures and they've had different things. They had cats for a while. I can't remember. Somebody did cows. Yeah, so, and that's kind of that cool thing where you're doing something that might bring a little bit of cohesiveness
Yeah.
to the area and also allow for expression. On the murals thing, I would say there just needs to be something that says make sure murals can happen and that you're not getting tied up in your sign regulations.
Which I think we're pretty good about right now.
I think we are. I think it's just not something that's been proposed, but I know we did, for example, have the DRB make a decision about the kayaks that were bolted to the wall at LLB and that they were not a sign. Because if they were, they would be too big, and rather they are an artish building element. I don't remember. We just decided they weren't a sign and it was okay, basically. The DRB did. But yeah.
I do
Yeah, I
consider that arty.
Oh, I like what Mickey, you were saying about like those coordinated art features. I think we can add something in here about, maybe facilitating that type of project. Where it's like, hey, artists, if you wanna paint this, I don't know what the Williston one would be. The old brick church steeple, mini versions.
Mini steeples.
If you wanna make mini steeples and decorate them however you like, and we'll put them around town, like coordinating that like RFP process, maybe it's a grant application.
Chicken statues.
Statues.
I like it.
Here he comes for his chicken ordinance again. I watch him. Megan.
You can have a loud one with a statue.
All right, I'm being humorous today and I was not suggesting we should exploit Hannah's skills for free. Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, thank you. I really like where this conversation's going, and I just, as part of Team Red, want to, kind of affirm that I hear you. I think this is a great idea. I wonder too, and now that Matt is here with us, is there almost like a way to have like an art fund where developers could, pay into something, and we, the town could sort of like generate something bigger than the little twisted piece of metal that this place has, and the, you know, splash of paint on a wall that that place has, and all that kind of thing. And then, so I love the idea of kind of collective, you know, collecting all of the, you know, potential funding for this. But also I really like the idea of encouraging kind of the grassroots art in our community that's already here to be somehow lifted up and included in this process. So that, you know, I heard Emily say RFP a minute ago. I mean, maybe there could be, you know, a particular call for art installations, or whatever form it might take, that this collective art fund could then allocate. And I think that would have so much more meaning to people if it's kind of coming up from the community. And you know, we would know, oh, so and so, yeah, they're, you know, they live over there, and and yeah, my kid was in school with their kid, or whatever, you know, we have connections. And I think that's partly what I was trying to get at with the social infrastructure piece, is that we build on existing connections to make them stronger and more apparent in the landscape and in just the way that we interact with our place, so that those kind of roots and place meanings and connections that people have are more visible and are more renewable. And then also that, you know, we're benefiting artists in our own community, right? That we're investing in people who live in Williston, or, you know, at least regionally, as a way to express our, you know, support for their art, but also to make it very much about the place. So I was just kind of like thinking all these great, based on your comments, it was really, this all was kind of stewing in my head, but thank you.
Yeah, and then our last goal is define and support Williston's creative sector. So in Chittenden County, visual and arts and crafts, design and specialty foods are some of the bigger sectors for jobs. Support the development and improvement of accessible venues, facilities, and workspaces for creative programs and enterprises. Evaluate local policies that inhibit the growth of the creative economy, and evaluate new or revised policies. So that could be things like the event ordinance or zoning. I think this has a lot of synergy with what we talked about last time about the rural economy, you know, the sculptor studio that's a bit more industrial, but it's okay, or the barn that gets converted into co-working or individual studio spaces. Support arts and creative enterprises through the library and rec programming, and then support and expand the library of things. So can it include equipment or tools
Love
or
that.
materials that we use for creative endeavors. And then the photos at the field, the barn. And then probably talk to Helen and Williston Community Theater, because that's been a pretty strong grassroots movement in Williston.
And you know, I think, Emily, going back to some of the discussion about evaluating not just zoning, but other town ordinances for whether they're helping or hindering some of these things. I mean, part of the job of zoning administration tends to be being the wet blanket. And, you know, we experienced that, and we have, you know, we've fed it back to the planning commission and made some meaningful progress around things like food trucks aren't site plan review in front of the DRB anymore. They're accessory to commercial parking and administrative, which is great. the events permitting, the way that temporary event ordinance ended up being adopted, we've talked about it, but like your typical high school graduation party is now technically a regulated event in town because the size threshold was set really, really low, 40 people. Anything with 40 people becomes a temporary event subject to that ordinance and permitting, which is not something people are following, and I'm not, and I've heard, we've had a few, complaints of people, somebody wanted to do sort of like a cars and coffee, event with other people who live in their apartment building, and they went to the manager of the building, and the manager said, well, I'm fine with it, but it would require this permit, and that permit requires showing a proof of insurance. And not a lot of people who want to do grassroots things carry a certificate of insurance around with them or know how to even, get that. And I would imagine some of what happens with our arts community would run into that as well. So there's evaluating, lowering barriers, making sure that spaces are available for these things to happen. Number one, that the spaces are the right kinds of spaces for these things to happen, but also that in our managerial and sort of regulatory role as a town, these things are facilitated, and you don't have to fix it all in the town plan. The fact that the town plan says this is a good idea and we should look at it helps us, if we're the staff or someone else, go to the select board and say, when you adopted this plan, you sort of signed up for us to take a look at this, and here's where we've identified some barriers. And, we don't have a lot of, like craft fairs that happen on a town green, for example. Or art markets that happen on a Sunday somewhere. It was one of my favorite things I saw in Ireland last fall was, one side of this walled park in Dublin is just where all the painters sell paintings on, Sunday afternoon or whatever. And I don't even know if there's permitting involved in that. I think it's just like people show up, right? So we've actually, I think, already made some progress on thinking about our regulatory barriers that way, and some of it is in what I'm thinking about with economy too. But knowing that a lot of creative stuff happens or starts out on a total shoestring, and it's grassroots or it's one person, knowing that those town regimes can be a barrier if we treat all temporary events the same, or if we treat all uses of public space the same, you risk places being really sterile, or you risk only the very, very large organizations being able to participate, and that kind of limits the diversity of it. So I think those are all things that, with just a little seed in a chapter like this, it gives us license in the 8-year time period to take them on and put some energy into them.
That's important.
Yeah, that's come up during our team discussion, right? We see some of those things need, 30 days or 45 days ahead application. Plus all those kind of different department review and need to make sure fire department need to support and all kind of different things, right? So we really need to increase the threshold a little bit. If not, then it will never happen, right? Because people look at it and say, oh, I'm not going to do this, I got my other thing to worry about.
Yeah, so, yeah, and like, right now, food trucks are okay in private parking lots with a sort of basic permit, but you really can't just set one up on a piece of public land. And obviously, there are the things the town has to think through if somebody starts doing that. But it is, people have come before and said, they'll come to our counter and say, I want to have a food truck in Williston. What can I do? You say, well, are you talking to a property owner anywhere? They said, no, I thought I'd just have one. Well, whose land are you going to have it on? And that stuff has ebbed and flowed as well. I think people were, like 10 years ago, we were getting a lot more questions about that as people just tried it out, and it's settled down, but it'll probably come back again. Yeah,
Cool.
next up.
Andrew, you're up.
Sounds good. Do you want me to, I can share if you want.
Sure.
Okay. All right, so yellow team is a bit more at an outlining phase, and let me see here if I can make this large enough for everyone. Can someone in the room tell me, is it big enough
Yeah.
to see?
Mhm.
Great.
A little bit more for Mr. Chapin.
There we go.
Is that better?
Thank you.
That's
So-
great.
Great. So yeah, we have a bit more of an outline so far, a little less polished, so bear with me. I guess I'll get right into it. For our kind of introductory section, I've outlined some basic things that we'd like to talk about in our group, talked about as important topics. Really, the first thing to say is that talk about the history of conservation in Williston, and the fact is that we've done a really good job. And I'll talk more about this in a second, but I think this is a great opportunity to show a map, at least a single map, but maybe a couple maps that show all sorts of information, and I'll put a pin in that. I think also an important thing to state is how land is conserved and what that means, and how in Williston we've kind of have had a few different ways that we've protected land and protected our natural resources when it's not just a conservation easement. Also, an important thing is just a recognition that Williston's population will continue to grow. And then talking about kind of our more broad goals. We, like I said, have a long history of conservation, and so we have this really extensive infrastructure and trails and parks that will continue to be, they need to be maintained. And so that's an important part of it, and there's problem solving there, and things like flood resilience is an example. You know, our Allen Brook Bridge that is flooded out, that's a great example. And then we have this kind of rough 30 by 50 goal that we've been talking about, and it's conserving 30% of Williston's land by 2050. It's kind of an interesting goal to have right now because the state is working on a 30 by 30 and a 50 by 50 goal. And that's part of the Act 59. And I'll just talk a little bit about that. That's not 30 by 30 and 50 by 50 in every town. Different towns may be able to do more than 50. Think about the Northeast Kingdom versus Williston. But Williston still would like to do its part. And so talking a little bit about what current initiatives are, what the Conservation Commission has been working on with ERF and the bylaw. And we'll get into that with our goals and such later. And so this is where I'll pick back up on our opportunity to have some really informative maps. I think we've already touched on it tonight, the importance of showing what we currently have and what the opportunities are. And our group talked a little bit about this spatial analysis of looking at where current parks are, where trails are, and how accessible they are to different parts of Williston. And so my thought was to sort of have a simplified version of the official map that shows, you know, currently conserved land and a distinction there between land that's privately owned and conserved, and land that we own, the town owns and is conserved. We also have protected open space as part of subdivisions, and that isn't technically conserved, which I was alluding to before. But it still has a lot of value, and you know, it's probably not going to change, but, you know, there's, I think historically, Matt and I have talked about how this is, you know, it's been a policy decision, and it's not something that's been shouted from the rooftops. And it's, you know, as we're thinking about longevity, there's a question of what to do about that. So that's generally what we have for our initial discussion. Learning very quickly that it's hard to write those overarching statements while sitting at the front desk, which thankfully we've got some other people who are contributing, and so Chapin has been working on some of that, which I very much appreciated. And so a little conversation here about what our public engagement told us. I'd like to note that Chapin and I discussed this. We didn't talk specifically about conservation on its own. There was kind of this combination of talking about energy and also conservation and open space. And, you know, kind of a hindsight thing as we look at this, but as we sort through the results, I think making that clear is important. I have some notes here from that and some quotes, and I'm going to skip down to Chapin. If you want to talk a little bit about what you wrote on livable, resilient, and equitable, I think they're connected here.
Yes, so what you see here in red is what is the initial stab I took, looking at those three things. So, you know, I just talked about the accessibility of things and what we could do to improve the accessibility. And then the resilience, I assume when resilience, we're talking mostly about climate resilience, you know, natural land resilience. And then for equitable, the part that was the most interesting to me to work on was the equitable part, which is the bottom half of this screen you're looking at, in terms of removing barriers to our conserved lands. And I just sort of, it's just my thought process, you can see.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, on the whole, I thought we should have a goal of having rec paths, or at least bike lanes connecting from our more populated areas to all of our country parks. And then at the bottom of that paragraph, I thought it was important to have more country park settings and community park opportunities closer to Taft Corners, since that's the growth center. And so the last sentence there about the proposed Allenbrook Community Park and the Abzi Manahanik, or Tree Island Country Park, are steps in that direction. And we as a group have also talked about that piece of land that Finney Crossing gave us, that's the other side of the brook towards Katy Lane and the developments on the other side. And of course, also on this topic, if we, I think I put it in here somewhere. Oh, there it is, the bottom of the paragraph above, the open and natural areas along with stormwater infrastructure. Oh, I didn't put it somewhere. I put the stormwater infrastructure can be part of a park too.
Yeah. And I think the other thing here, and before with the conversation with Emily's group and with what Chapin was just saying, it's pretty clear to me we have a lot of overlap between our different topic areas. You know, we have our recreation and parks topic coming up, and I think that it's okay that there's all this overlap, and just worth noting. So I guess I can stop there before we get into our goals and objectives, if anyone has any comments.
Andrew, I got one question though. We talk about this 30 by 2050, right? Do we have some statistic to see like past 20 years or 25 years, where are we now? Like, let's say like 5% now, we are 15% or whatever, and you were gonna show the map or something like that in the town, part of it, to see like, 2020, we were this much. Now where we are today, and then we're gonna be 30%, increase to 30% by the time this town plan is.
I can't remember off the top of my head where exactly we are right now. I want to say it's 11%, but that's just what comes to mind.
I'll check.
But
There he
Mickey,
goes.
I think that would be really good to call out.
Yeah,
And with that map.
yeah,
And Andrew, your point about, well, what is conserved that's at the bottom of the screen right now, because we, I think we've talked about this, we have some things that are open space just by virtue of subdivision approval and enforced only through the zoning authority, which is far less permanent than something like a conservation easement held by a third party, or ownership by the town, and then a conservation easement on top of that held by a third party, which is sort of the gold standard. So I'm almost imagining, Andrew, it may not make it into the final draft, but like a pie chart of unconserved
mhm,
and then conserved by the various means.
mhm,
And then talking about, almost like a speedometer, like where do you want that pie wedge to go? So like something that illustrates what does 30 by 50 or 30 by 30 look like, that would help people understand that might be good. The only other thing is in relation to the paragraph about Taft Corners, and you may get into this in your goals, I haven't looked recently, mentioning that we do have some primitive lands or country park type lands mapped in the official map as part of the form-based code, including the Bur Oak Knoll behind Cottonwood and around the water tower. And I think stating that those are sort of on the map as desired for conservation, and also stating that that map should be the place where updates go when there are specific pieces of land that are desirable. Expand that sort of developer shall accommodate this public facility language out into the rest of town and more broadly in Taft Corners might be a good idea.
Yes, I tried to address that in the middle of the paragraph in the top half of the screen where it says the green spaces within the growth center regulating plan are a start. Because they are the bit of country park setting that, or passive recreation setting that we are creating for our growth center dense area. In answer to Mickey's question, the brain trust here says we're at 16% in our effort to get to 30 by 50.
Okay. And Andrew and
16%.
16, yeah. Andrew and company, the only comment I would make, and I may have missed it, it may be in there, is to clearly define what each of the different forms of conservation actually are, so that people will understand, what we're talking about, because you can imagine that's the kind of thing that's going to get hackles up if it's seen as dissembling in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always public access, so being clear that some of what we're talking about, as you mentioned here, or just did, it's here, we have public access, that's sometimes for fee. And we also have, like private subdivision open space, there is no public access required. And in fact, sometimes, I think it's about once every 8 months, somebody from Southridge posts a front porch forum post that says, hey, people who don't live in Southridge, don't go on our trails, please, they're private. And there are some private trails within Southridge. There's also some public trails within Southridge, and it's worth paying attention to that. Especially as there are more and more people in Taft Corners adjacent, that's gonna continue to show up. So
yeah,
helping tease that out a little bit, because I think your point about resiliency both to climate and things like population change and density and intensity change is really important. There's gonna be more people looking to get outside.
Yeah.
Over time.
Along the lines of that, like talking about what different types of conservation look like, it might be worth including, like explicitly including it, that it also can look like farmland. Because that's something that people verbalize of like preserving the rural character and saying that like preserving a farm, even if it's a private farm, is still part of this, like. It would still count as the 30, as part of the 30. So that helps tie it in instead of someone panicking, being like, the town's gonna buy 30% of the land because we need to conserve it. It's like. No, it's a private farm, and like also people said that that was important to keep supporting that as a business and as a part of Williston's landscape.
Definitely, definitely.
Do we think the broader view of those, like, too many different part of the pie? Do we want to, I don't know, intentionally make it to be, there are like only 2 or 3 types of.
I think
Imagine,
we can look at that, see what it looks
you know
like.
what I'm
and
trying
then-
to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
It might make it a bit more so-called like clean cut, and
Mhm.
people don't get confused by, oh, how do I really know, right? Or we even convert one into another that will benefit the community in the long run.
Yeah. I think for all of the chapters we're working on, when we get into our graphics and our facts and figures. I would love it if the way this town plan ends up working is someone who only looks at the pictures will still have an idea about where the town is going and how it's trying to get there, just because they went and flipped through and did that. That's a high bar, but I think we can get there by showing some of the takeaways. So that would be my test when we do those pie charts, or however we show people the land, is, would somebody who's just flipping through, looking at the pictures, get the gist of what the chapter's trying to communicate? Yeah, this is great.
So we'll move into our goals and objectives. So broadly, the overarching goal here is conserving Williston's natural resources through land conservation. Tried to keep it simple. I don't know if it catches everything in that statement, but we can go into objectives, and this is some repetition of what we've been talking about, but we've had some great conversations with the Conservation Commission recently, and I think they've informed a lot of these. So first up, conserving 30% of Williston's land by 2050. And then the strategy being continuing to fund the Environmental Reserve Fund to support purchasing by the town. We saw this, support within the survey for, an increase in taxes if that means more land conservation. And so there we go right there. Explore how we define conserved land and decide what we're trying to do. And I mentioned here Act 59 again, and I don't think I've said it previously, but there are kind of 4 different categories that they're looking at, and it ranges from kind of the preserve, leave it alone conservation to, hey, this is a place that's basically a public park in the center of a growth center, but it still has value, and in between that. So additionally, there is this idea, the Conservation Commission and Eric, the chair, has had this goal of having $800,000 as a kind of a maximum within the ERF. And the ways of contributing to that have been through asking for money yearly. Also recently, the town has begun investing that money in a CD, which does have returns, and the Conservation Commission will tell you that they wish we were doing that 20 years ago. But so that's why the next action underneath is to continue doing that. And wanting to do that in a way that it's still accessible, and so that we don't take penalties. And what that looks like right now is investing that money into separate different accounts that renew kind of in an offset time throughout the year. And then lastly, this source is from a conversation with Shelburne, actually, and that they've had a ballot item that's not, it's not a line item in their budget, but an actual vote. And the Conservation Commission is, they discussed this and kind of the benefits and the maybe the possible negatives of doing that. But if you had a certain piece of land on the hook and you had a vote, that might be something that they're interested in. Moving forward, the Conservation Commission really wants to grow relationship with landowners. And this key is the end of this, which is with people who are interested in conservation. And talking with them, there's kind of this idea that we don't want to be putting on pressure on landowners, like you're on our list if you don't want to be, but to have a list of people who may be interested in the future is a big goal for them. And so part of that is outreach and looking at the ERF priority. And that you can see that in the next two actions. And then this one about updating ERF priority. This is something that, once again, we're talking about even since the ERF priority was done, which I believe is 2019, but Matt, maybe you can correct me or someone else. The goals have already shifted a little bit. We're talking a lot more about water quality. Kim Coleman was talking about how much her work has changed, working for UVM and looking at forestry practices. And so continuing to update that is big. And these actions, there's a bit of a disclaimer there that they want to recognize that ERF priority reflects the values of the Conservation Commission, but that they should continue to reassess it and in light of the goals in the plan. And so as much as we can, if we can state goals related to that, I think that will be important. And I think that being more specific about that might be something that we need to work on in this chapter. And then there's this kind of idea that we want to state that the goal of conserving land with neighboring towns and regionally very clearly. And there's some coordination, but I think there could be an even higher level of coordination with other towns. And so I think that's also important. I'm going to pause there. If anyone has comments, we have a couple more here.
Andrew, I'm sorry, I can give you this too afterwards. It just should say it reflects the priority of Williston, people of Williston, not the Conservation Commission. I put it in the I'll put it in the document.
Here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, yeah. And so moving on to this other type of conservation that we've been talking about, which is protecting land through the Development Review Board process and looking at subdivision design. And so a goal to continue doing that and to also kind of reassess how that process is being done. An example is the visual impact assessment. Looking at our viewshed maps, they're very outdated, and so it's a bit of a formality at this point. And also a lot of them were done from roads, which take that as you will. And then, just continuing to update that data, and then continuing to manage land that we already have conserved. It's no small task, as I'm learning quickly. And I think it will continue to be important. And then Chapin, you've added some on the bottom here as well, which I think you've already touched on, but if you want to add, please do.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel that I have a lot to add other than I just was putting the ideas out, and this was taking the equitable, resilient ideas and putting them into trying to put them into objectives.
The last thing I'll say, we have our kind of our idea list from our brainstorm. And I'd just like to call out some other topics that we just haven't gotten around to, or may also overlap with other topics. So this is a place that I think we may talk about Catamount specifically. And then I also highlighted the cultural resources section. We have a bit of a where does this go? We had a joint meeting between the Conservation Commission and the HDAC about regulating archaeology and that sort of thing, and how that will be a requirement of this plan. And so there's kind of a question about where that goes. And then there's also kind of the other side of it, which is looking at cultural resources like the old brick church, or historic structures. And I think that falls more under stuff that Emily's group has been working on, but there's kind of a question of where to draw that line. And then Megan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that that maybe this is even one of the bullet points, is to coordinate closely with the Williston Historical Society. They're very interested in collaborating with other groups and the town, and they have an incredible wealth of knowledge for some of this kind of initiative.
Definitely add that. Thank you.
I have one, I like how like specific it is in these action items. I think it's really great. I am curious about the objective of continue to manage conserved town land. I think one question that comes up for me a lot when we talk about conservation is, what are we conserving the land for? Who are we conserving the land for? Are we conserving this land for environmental reasons, for specific protected like population, species, just because it's good to have trees in our environment? Are we conserving it for people? Like, I wonder if part of that, that habitat disturbance assessment, wetland delineations, like, I wonder if there's like something about basically like outlining the specific conservation goals for town owned land, so that people have an understanding of like, yeah, the town owns this land, and it's like, and its conservation goal is for this, it's so that people can be outside, or this one is to protect the certain species that live here. And I know that a lot of that literature lives in little details about the town. But I'm wondering, like, maybe it's even in the intro of like answering what do we conserve land for? Like, why do we do this? Because I think part of me still like not fully gets that question answered, and I think people have it. So that was just my only thought, but I think this, like, I really like all the like initiatives, and also that idea of growing food, like a food community garden sense. Like, I think that's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for that feedback. I think that to your previous point about stating those conservation goals, I think that what you're touching on a little bit might be related to management plans for specific pieces of town land. And I think that could be more clearly stated in this chapter. And, those as we're continuing to update those. But I also think that, yeah, I think that does kind of might be best done at a parcel level, looking at different areas and what the goals are. But then having a broader statement about how those different goals kind of work together and may also conflict at times. And recognizing that I think is important.
It might also be easier to get people to, I didn't realize that it was like you could volunteer to help manage and like monitor a town park until I found myself down like a rabbit hole on our website, and like if there was a management plan for like this is the plan for this area, like someone who is there regularly or whatever, it might, I don't know, it might be like a useful touch point to engage the community.
I think though, Andrew, and I can write this a note for myself and try to do it. Like in our intro, Hannah, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying like, we say what people valued, but stating in the intro, we are looking to conserve land in Williston in order to bullet, right? And I think, Andrew, what you're saying is, yeah, each parcel has a very intricate management plan, but for the purposes of this, we do need to explain that there are a variety and that they do conflict sometimes, but that there are a variety of reasons and what those ones are. Go ahead, Chief.
Okay. I think it's a really good point, and it raises something that I don't know how to resolve, which is, as a lot of those management plans say, to control invasives, because invasives are pretty prevalent around Williston, and especially they follow trails, and Catamount is a perfect example of major problems with invasives. So we could say something about that, but then I realized that managing invasives is something we're trying to do town-wide, or we should be. Individual landowners are doing it on their land. And this is not about conserving land. This is just something that's good for the land that's apart from conserving it. And so I wonder, I don't know what to do with this, but I wonder if there's something about applying the goals of our conserved land to all lands through programs, outreach and other programs to landowners.
Or using them as places for demonstration and teaching too.
Yeah.
I think that's great. Yeah, I think yellow team, we can add that.
Are you able to capture these notes, Andrew, or do you want me to do that?
I can do that.
I just sent Chapin and Andrew a comment on our food security thing, which is that we do need to add. We have, growing vegetables here, but we do need to add something about small scale ag with animals. I don't know anything there about that.
Do you mean chickens, Shayla?
Lots of chickens.
I didn't say it, Megan. I did not say it. It could be sheep, for example. But actually, we do need to do that because it is important.
She may have said it sheepishly, but she wasn't chicken to say it.
Exactly.
No.
Thank you, Chapin. Thank you. Uh-oh, it's getting towards 9 o'clock, so you can tell. Do we have one more?
Yeah, I want to talk about economy a little bit. Actually, Emily, if you can
Yeah.
get into the file tree before you bring up the chapter, which, as I said in my email, is kind of a mess, and it has nothing to do with Ellie or Hannah. It's just me being pulled sideways the last 2 weeks, which somehow didn't keep anybody else from getting their work done, but did a little bit for me. But within that
Yeah,
team
on the
green,
tree.
in the team green folder, there should be 2 spreadsheets. Well,
There's 3: CLA impact, changing values, property tax impact.
I'm sorry, I just have to look at which one I want. To bring up, property tax impact of new development. So rather than talk about the chapter draft for a second, because I think I can give you a better run through that next time, a little bit of numbers work. Some of you who read Front Porch Forum might have recently seen some unhappiness with the Finney Crossing Hotel and its size and form-based code, and calls for some of you to be voted out of being on the planning commission anymore. And one thing that people told us a lot at the roundtables, one thing they value about Williston, or they definitely want in Williston, is they don't want their taxes to go up, and they like that their taxes are lower here. So I wanted to do a thought exercise just about the Finney Crossing Hotel. And the Finney Crossing Hotel, let me see, where is this? Actually, I think it's a different, sorry, I think it's a different table. What are the other ones called? I have to remember.
CLA impact changing values per property category.
I might not, it might be in H planning economy, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I might not have loaded this one in. There's like almost nothing in this, but, that's the one we have up, right? Oh, no, that says with and without Finney, perfect, okay. So. Here we go. Oh, so I think. If you,
Oh, wait.
there you go, you got it, you got it,
Scrolled,
okay,
defaulted to be lower.
so,
We're good.
this is in the Team Green folder, and anybody's welcome to look at it and play with it. But when you get new development in town, one thing happens is that new development's property value is added to the town's grand list. Meaning that the amount of tax the town needs to raise gets spread over a bigger pool of value in the town. So in this table, Williston's grand list on as far as assessed value goes today is about $2.15 billion. The Finney Crossing Hotel adds some, about $5,721,000 to that. And so to raise the same amount of tax money, you can tax everybody at a very slightly lower rate when you add value to your grand list. So you see this in your property tax bill. Now, the other thing that happens with something like a hotel is it generates local option sales tax revenue. And I would project that hotel will generate a little over $30,000 a year in local option tax revenue. For fiscal year 24, Williston, about 27% of the town's budget is paid for through local option revenue. So it's a collectively huge offset on your property tax bill coming from the town. So this is just a way to compare Williston with and without that one building, raising the same amount of taxes. And so when you go down below, I've just modeled it against a $300,000 house. You get $7. If you have a $300,000 house, your taxes are $7 a year lower with the Finney Hotel than they are without it. Now, of course, the increased cost of health insurance for town employees completely blows the $7 out of the water. But the point is, you can even look at just one new building in town and you can see a non-zero impact to what somebody's individual property tax bill coming from the town might look like. The point of this goes into the conversation about what people see when they see Williston's economy. I think we often think of our economy as being about employment, and Williston's economy definitely employs a lot of people, but it employs very few people who live in Williston. It employs people from the region, but most people in Williston who work outside of the town. And I have some numbers on that we'll be plugging into the chapter. What Williston's economy does is it makes the town a more complicated place than if we were just a bedroom community, but it also makes everybody who lives here's taxes less. And there are types of development that are going to give you this $7 savings, and there are types of this development that are going to generate costs to the town that will obliterate that $7 savings. And so part of what I want to talk about in the economy section, and if you look at the draft, I've started to try to do this, is that one thing for the town to think about is encouraging the kind of development that costs the town less than the revenue it generates. Unless there's some compelling reason to effectively subsidize a new piece of commercial or industrial development in town, we should be, this is the math behind smart growth, essentially. Now, so, for example, with this new revenue coming from this hotel, so I don't know if I have the number on property tax. I think it's about 20-something thousand dollars a year in new property tax revenue, plus the 30,000 in new local option revenue. If we needed to build a big, long new public street to access this hotel, it would cost us money to plow and maintain that street. And it wouldn't be as worth it. If we build that hotel on an existing public street, which is where it's going, we're better off. If we need to build a big, long sewer line to serve it. And this is the basis of a lot of the sort of strong towns, do the math, sort of approach to planning. So I think that the thrust of the economy chapter is that Williston has done, I think, just about everything it can do that's big around its zoning and its development standards to try to shape its economy. We've said what goes where, and we've said how much, and in the land use chapter, we've noted that those boundaries haven't really shifted a whole lot. We've done things around the edges to get more flexible about small business, which is a thing that people also really want to see the economy producing for them, is more opportunity for small business. We've done a few things around that. We've got a few more things we can do. But the next big phase of, if Williston as a town institution wants to play a role in what happens to its economy, is going to come from public investment in infrastructure and how the town makes choices about where and when and how much to have those investments be. So a few examples: we have portions of the industrial district that are not served by our sewer system, even though they're in the sewer service area. That severely limits what kinds of industrial uses can go on there. It's fine for a warehouse or a mini storage, but it's not great for a production bakery that needs wastewater treatment, for example. We have very limited ability to think about doing things like the Trader Lane project, where the town would actually go into a place and build an entire new street. Those are really big, expensive things. You would want to do them only in places where you were going to get a monetary return, as well as achieve your land use goals and your aesthetic goals and your public realm goals and all those other things. So I think, looking back at past town plans, there was a chapter called economic development, I think in 2006 or maybe 2000, and it kind of fell by the wayside. This is really something that we're bringing back, not just talking about, we're observing Williston's economy, but what is the role for the town to shape it. So I didn't want to show you my big ugly chapter with all the stuff in it before I just showed you kind of some number crunchy stuff. The other thing, Emily, if you scroll down, is just something else we're working on, which is talking about the fact that overall, what we're about to experience in Williston is a massive increase in the assessed value of residential properties in town, and probably not a commensurate increase, and maybe even a decrease in the assessed value of commercial and industrial properties in town. So when that happens, the overall tax burden in town is going to shift that much more to homeowners. And that's that big, long kind of note there. That, we're at a 69% common level of assessment. That means when the state of Vermont looks at how land and property is valued in Williston, and they look at recent sales, they're seeing that our grand list has about 69% of the value that ought to be there if we were adjusting everything for how it's selling. And when you factor that in, instead of a $2.15 billion grand list, Williston should have like about a $3.1 billion grand list. And if you need to go find most of that $1 billion in the residential properties, the tax rate will go down, but the share of total taxes paid by residential properties will go up. There's another table in the folder where I did this based on no increase in value for commercial or industrial properties. All of the 69% CLA adjustment happens on residential. A $300,000 home pays about $250 a year more in town tax under that scenario. And that is reflected, but at a far greater magnitude with the school tax, which I didn't get into because there's a little more math behind that. We're going to meet with the assessors to talk about that. But it's very likely that reassessment work will start while this town plan is still being drafted. And it's very likely that, like Burlington and South Burlington, increased tax burden will fall to homeowners, which is what I experienced living in South Burlington. Melinda experienced it living in Burlington. We saw our tax bills go up quite a bit because the same thing is happening there as is likely to happen here. And lastly, I think just what that says going forward is you want, if you have your commercial stuff, number one, commercial stuff that generates local option revenue is better than commercial stuff that doesn't, because that really helps the money equation work better. And number two, commercial stuff that's really high value is a lot better than commercial stuff that's disposable. What I mean by that is it did go down in value at Maple Tree Place. Maple Tree Place recently sold for about $6 million less than we had it on the books for. So that's a minus that's going to go into that spreadsheet. But if Maple Tree Place was the University Mall, it probably would have deteriorated in value by 50% or more. And we would be experiencing that. So when you have commercial stuff that is going to be part of your grand list portfolio, you want stuff that's going to hold its value. That also plays into our industrial district, which is aging. So making investments in infrastructure or in permit flexibility or otherwise that allows for the adaptive reuse and redevelopment of our industrial properties. I know people were really bummed that the Sports and Fitness Edge went away, but it was an old building with a leaky swimming pool that was going to be really expensive to fix. And in a county with a real need for big industrial space, and the owners went in and they dumped many millions of dollars back into that building to create really high value industrial manufacturing, production, and storage space, which means that thing stays on the books for something closer to what we see it for. So those are just some, not always the prettiest things to think about, but the idea that land and buildings is really the town of Williston's investment portfolio. And it should be diverse, it should be resilient. I didn't talk about livable and equitable just now, but you'll see some statements about that in the chapter. It should be an economy that benefits everyone. How do we do that? How do we deal with the commuter workforce and the fact that there's a real equity implication there? We're going to talk about that a lot with housing. And in terms of livability, economic activity can have an impact on the livability of especially where people live. And we have some places where those borders bump up against each other, and there's some land use conversation there. So that's where I'm headed on economy. I'll give you a chapter run through next time when it's more than half baked. Chapin's got his hand up.
Thanks. And you had also given us an analysis earlier about if we'd had a TIF district, the increase in the value of the properties from the developments that have come of late. And I think that's all very helpful. I think you might have had it there, but went by it fast. When people look at that $7 benefit to them from that hotel on their tax bill, they will also say, well, how much did it take for safety, public safety, for fire, police?
Yep.
And in general, the things that increase our local option tax also tend to require more of that kind of service than most things. And so it's important to not at least acknowledge, or if we can't show, that part of the equation as well, so people don't say this is a one-sided analysis. The point, your second point about how the CLA reappraisal is going to shift burden to homeowners is really important. And I had not been aware of that. Thank you for pointing that out.
I would like to add something on top of what Chapin was saying though. Would it be better though if we use the other hotel that already exists as an example? And you can see what are the resources that it drains versus what it's doing, then it make it more live version of it that we can see. I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud, right?
So when we talk about town services, which is another chapter on my list and Emily's, we want to talk a little bit about the cost of service demand. And emergency services is about 45% of the town's budget, and public works is about another 25%, which is mostly plowing and maintaining roads. So there are types of uses that generate higher and lower service demand. Of late, Walmart has generated a lot of service demand. It does also generate an incredible amount of local option sales tax revenue. And I think we can start to acknowledge that shape, and it's going to be a little hard to get the fine-grained service demand, but you're absolutely right. It's not like that hotel is going to demand zero services from the town. It probably won't demand $50,000 a year in services from the town. And I think there are some ways we can just sort of show what that looks like. But I think that the town should be thinking about, if you, I don't know, if you're considering a land use, like especially if somebody came in with a, like a specific plan for, I don't know, a big water park, for example, a big theme park or a carnival or, something like that, where you go, well, what's that going to be like in terms of visiting, or a really big box store. I did a quick back of the envelope on, like a Costco at one point, and it does generate an awful lot of revenue, but it's not infinite, and it's a number you can figure out, and then you can figure out whether it's worth amending your land use goals to accommodate something like a Costco with its gigantic parking lot and all of those things. Costco's a little better on service demand because of the club membership and the card holder stuff. There's a little less shoplifting there than there is at a place that's wide open. But really, I think at this level in this plan, it's like asking the town to just at least put its glasses on where it looks at things from this perspective a little bit, because I don't think that's ever really been reflected in the town plan before. But the general idea of value density in the right places that is easier and less expensive to serve and generates good revenue for the town, and also stuff that's not a liability 20 or 30 years down the road, and thinking about that, thinking about when I'll send you guys all, the guy from Strong Towns, Joe Minicozzi, who does the value density stuff, testified to the Vermont legislature last year, and he does this talk about, what the strategy is of the box stores, which is typically to build, fully depreciate the building in 15 years, and then, file a tax protest every single year, basically going to whatever municipality they're in, saying, hey, our building's it's worthless now. It's zero. You shouldn't tax us at all. All the while the service demand keeps going up, with emergency services and policing and things like that. So, there are better and worse investments, if you think of them that way, for a municipality to make when it has as diverse a economy as Williston does. So,
And then there are things like senior living where it's like, we know the data says this is gonna generate a lot of call volume, and we still need to have this use in our town.
yep, a senior living building is a money loser for a town. It just is. It's also a place for a big segment of Williston's population to either they will live there or they won't live in town. Really heavily subsidized affordable housing is a big service demand. We are seeing that in Williston with the CHT project at Zephyr Place. It just is. You've got people transitioning out of homelessness. They need services. They need services that are provided by the town, where they're quite frequently doing that. There's a trade-off there of saying, yeah, but that's really something on those equity goals that I think people are saying they want the town to do. So
I think that is another really important thing. Like, I think that it is an interesting analysis, and it's a, you know, that balance of, yes, the hotel, maybe you don't like the aesthetic, and here's the thing it gives you. But I do worry about that, like, oh, everything needs to be, you
Are you
know,
gonna do the math on
fiscally
everything?
contributing in a pot, in the black kind of way, because EMS is not there for cost effectiveness. EMS is there as a service to residents. And
Right.
we all expect it to be there, want it to be there, and want it to be a high quality. And Williston's very lucky that we have all of those things. And so I just like, I don't know how you walk that line. So that's our line of walk, but like that line, I like the idea of being really clear about what the different sectors contribute from a taxpayer perspective. And something like the community center doesn't have a fiscal cost benefit. It has a huge societal cost benefit, you know? And so like, and that idea is, you know, and we just came through a really tough year. So I want to acknowledge that with the budgets and the school budgets and the town budget. And that was 1 year. And it is still something that over many years, people have asked for this community center. So just like, I think it is we just need to be careful about that narrative too, in this plan around, yes, taxes and keeping Williston affordable is important, and equity is part of that. Affordable housing makes it affordable for people who can't afford to purchase a single family home in whatever the rural ag district to live here, and that's important to us. And that means maybe higher taxes for some people. And I think, Chapin, it was maybe your comment the other day, like taxes are they're not like a set amount for every single individual, and it is based on your assets and your income. And so that increase is just, it just needs to be taken into consideration, and those other pieces.
And if I could amend the last thing you said, Shayla, about community center. A community center may well increase the retail value, or the land value of the properties around it, and even in the whole vicinity, or even the whole town. And so there may actually be a fiscal balance sheet for a community center.
Fair point. All right, it is 9:18, so I want to close out here. But again, just a huge thank you to everyone doing the work and the writing. Did not include myself those last 2 weeks. I'll try to up my game a little bit, Andrew. But I appreciate it. And we will see you again in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Oh, and the bylaw passed, just so you know, all the Home Act amendments passed. Thank you.
Way to bury the lead, Matt.
Belated absentee thank you to Simon, who spent a lot of time tracking down a bunch of the places that the bylaw needed to change because of the Home Act, and we wish him well from across the sea.
That's awesome.
Can
Great
I
work,
just
everyone.
Can I just ask quickly? I noticed I actually went to our website, And notice that Shayla and Hannah both have terms that expire this month. And I don't know what I hope they both stay with us. And I just wanted to put my annual reminder in that we switch over chairs usually for July 1st. And just to kind of put that on the June radar screen, it's probably
Yep.
things that we should talk about.
I think
Yeah,
that's for the 18th, Megan,
Okay,
is one
great.
thing of
Yeah, we will do that.
officers.
Okay.
Um,
Great.
And I did ask to
may
be, I
not
said
have
I was
seen it.
interested in reappointment, but they do that. Somebody asked me that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
When that happens. We'll see. I don't know about you.
Good night, everyone.
Okay,
Good night, Mike. Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
good night.